Advisory. Some episodes of the 1836 podcast are not intended for all audiences due to details that might be considered disturbing. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
This episode of the 1836 podcast shares the tragic story of the Sultana. Ask most Americans to name the worst maritime disaster in United States history, and they'd likely point to the Titanic, and they'd be wrong. What if I told you that this ill-fated ship isn't resting at the bottom of an ocean, but buried a little over 30 feet beneath the soil of a soybean field near Marion, Arkansas? The fiery loss of the Sultana, a badly overcrowded side-wheel steamboat that exploded and sank on the Mississippi River on April 27, 1865, is considered the nation's gravest maritime tragedy. It is estimated the number of deaths were as high as over 1,800 souls lost, surpassing the Titanic's 1,517. Though the exact number remains unknown due to the lack of recovery of victims swallowed by the river's flood-swift currents and the aftermath of sickness and infection. This is the tragic saga of the Sultana, whose catastrophic end left a permanent mark, yet faded into obscurity amid the end of the Civil War, the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, and the South's prolonged surrender. Prepare to uncover a story of greed, heartbreak, and a vessel entombed not by water, but by dirt. In January 1863, the SS Sultana rolled off the John Litherbury Boatyard docks in Cincinnati, Ohio, a gleaming testament to the era's steamboat ingenuity. Stretching 260 feet long and spanning roughly 70 feet wide, this side-wheel vessel towered 3 decks high. Its wooden frame, designed to carry a legal capacity of 376 passengers, including crew, crafted with the lucrative New Orleans cotton trade in mind. The Sultana was equipped with 4 fire-tube boilers driving its paddle wheels, a modern marvel promising efficiency on the bustling Mississippi River. For its first months, as the Civil War raged, the Sultana served the Union cause, ferrying troops and supplies up and down the river's muddy expanse. This military role persisted until July 1863, when Vicksburg, Mississippi, fell to Union forces, loosening the Confederacy's grip on the waterway. With the river now more open, the Sultana pivoted to a civilian life, hauling cotton, manufactured goods, and passengers between its home port of St. Louis, Missouri, and the vibrant hub of New Orleans. But by the spring of 1864, the original owner was ready to cash out, selling the 2-year-old steamboat to a group of St. Louis businessmen eager to capitalize on its potential. Among them was 34-year-old James Cass Mason, a driven figure who took the helm as captain. Under Mason's command, the Sultana continued its steady rhythm along the Mississippi. These early years painted the Sultana as a reliable workhorse, navigating a river vital to commerce and war, its fate still unwritten as the nation edged toward peace. On April 9th, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia, a moment that heralded the Civil War's imminent end. 5 days later, on April 14th, President Abraham Lincoln was shot while watching a play in Washington, D.C., dying the next morning on April 15th. As the Sultana lay docked at Cairo, Illinois, a telegraph crackled with this shattering news. Captain James Cass Mason, ever the opportunist, seized the chance to make his mark. With telegraph lines to the south severed by years of conflict, he pointed the Sultana toward New Orleans, aiming to be the first steamboat to carry word of Lincoln's death, a bid for fame on the river's bustling currents. Mid-April brought Mason another triumph, fresh off setting a record for the fastest upriver journey of any steamboat at the time. He was awarded a pair of elk antlers, a coveted emblem of speed, which he proudly mounted between the Sultana's twin smokestacks. This accolade barely had time to settle when opportunity knocked again at Vicksburg, Mississippi. There, Captain Reuben Benton Hatch, the chief quartermaster, approached Mason with a proposition born of greed. Fueled by the federal government's lucrative payments of $5 per soldier and $10 per officer to ferry Union ex-prisoners north, nearly 5,000 Union soldiers, recently paroled from Confederate hellholes like Andersonville, Georgia, and Cahaba, Alabama, awaited transport. Hatch promised Mason at least 1,000 men, worth about $2,500, over $40,000 today, if he'd slip him a kickback, a deal reflecting a blatant disregard for safety amid wartime corruption. Both men knew the Sultana's legal capacity was only around 376 passengers, including crew, but the lure of profit trumped caution, and Mason agreed to the shady deal. He steamed on to New Orleans, spreading news of Lincoln's fate, before doubling back to Vicksburg. On April 23rd, the Sultana limped into Vicksburg's wharf, its mission complicated by a leaking boiler. A mechanic urged a full repair, cutting out and replacing the ruptured seam, but that would take days, risking the loss of Mason's precious cargo to rival boats. Instead, he and Chief Engineer Nathan Wintringer opted for a hasty patch, hammering the bulge back and riveting a thinner plate over it, a fix completed in a single day despite inadequate maintenance standards. As repairs wrapped up, the ex-prisoners flooded in. Not the 1,000 Hatch had dangled, but over 2,000, herded aboard by Union Captain George Augustus Williams, who, suspecting bribery elsewhere, refused to split the group despite officers' warnings about the overload, joined by 70 paying civilians, 85 crew, and 22 guards. It is estimated the number of passengers were up to as high as over 2,500 souls, more than 6 times the Sultana's limit. Late on April 24th, groaning under the strain, the steamboat pulled away from Vicksburg, embarking on a journey that would prove its last. From the moment the Sultana departed Vicksburg late on April 24, 1865, it waged a grueling battle against the Mississippi's swollen spring flood. For 2 days, the steamboat strained northward, its engines laboring under a current made fierce by seasonal thaw. The sheer weight of its overloaded passengers caused the vessel to rock dangerously as men shifted to wave at passing steamboats or riverside farms. Alarmed that the abrupt shift in weight might tip the vessel, Captain Mason begged them to remain still. But the tilting wasn't just a balance issue. It tormented the 4 interconnected boilers. Already strained by the swollen river, the boilers faced a perilous pressure spike that spelled danger. Water sloshed between them, draining the highest while flooding the lowest, leaving the dry boiler to bake red hot over the furnace flames. When the ship leveled out, water surged back, flashing into steam and spiking pressure in an already overworked system. On April 26th, the Sultana paused at Helena, Arkansas, where photographer Thomas W. Banks captured its overcrowded decks in a haunting image, the sole surviving photograph, taken mere hours before its tragic end. Later that day, around 7 o'clock in the evening, it reached Memphis, offloading 300,000 pounds of sugar, a relief to the hold but a curse to its top-heavy frame, worsening the tilting. After taking on fresh coal near 1 o'clock in the morning on April 27th, the Sultana pressed on toward Cairo, Illinois, its final leg underway. In the pre-dawn hours of April 27, 1865, disaster struck. 3 of the 4 boilers erupted in a thunderous blast. The explosion ripped upward from their upper rear at a 45-degree angle, instantly killing an estimated 400 passengers with the blaster's searing steam. The force gutted the heart of the Sultana, shredding the main cabin, demolishing the cabin where the crew slept, and shearing off most of the pilot house. With no boilers to anchor them, the towering smokestacks toppled. The right smokestack crashed into the gaping wound, and the left smokestack smashed the crowded hurricane deck onto the second deck below, crushing dozens. Only the sturdy railings around the main stairway openings spared some from being flattened entirely. Debris from the shattered upper decks slid into the exposed fireboxes, igniting a slow, spreading blaze that soon engulfed the ship's midsection. Efforts to douse it failed. Fire buckets, used earlier to scoop river water, lay scattered and unreachable. The explosion flung hundreds into the frigid Mississippi, while others leapt to flee the advancing flames, clutching any scrap of wood they could find. Much like on September 11th, people faced a dire choice: be burned alive or jump. Many chose to leap, grasping at dead animals from the boat, horses or livestock, or debris, struggling to float in the icy current, preferring to drown or freeze rather than perish in the fire. Weakened by months in Confederate prisons, the ex-POWs faltered, clinging to each other in desperation. At first, the bow offered refuge, the wind blowing flames sternward, but fate turned cruel. One massive paddle wheel box broke free and splashed into the river, spinning the ship around. When the second detached, stabilizing the wreck, the bow faced downstream straight into the wind, driving the fire forward. Those who'd huddled on the bow, once safe, now faced a wall of flame, their sanctuary transformed into a trap as the Sultana burned relentlessly. As the Sultana blazed and splintered in the pre-dawn darkness of April 27, 1865, help arrived swiftly. Around 2:30 in the morning, the steamboat Bostona No. 2, fresh from a refurbishment and on her maiden voyage downriver, stumbled upon the harrowing scene. Without hesitation, her crew and passengers flung doors, shutters, planks, chairs, anything that could float, into the water, hauling approximately 150 survivors aboard. Captain John Watson, realizing the scale of the crisis, steamed toward Memphis to raise the alarm, hoping to summon more aid. By the time he arrived, the disaster was already unfolding along the Memphis waterfront. Victims, swept 7 miles downstream by the relentless current, drifted past the wharf, their cries piercing the night. The dock steamboats, their boilers cold and slow to pressurize, couldn't launch immediately, but crews sprang into action, deploying smaller boats and sounding yawls to pluck struggling survivors from the river's grasp. Upriver, nearer the burning wreck, hundreds of others fought to endure. Some clung to the tops of flooded trees or perched on the roofs of submerged barns and outbuildings, makeshift lifelines in the swollen Mississippi. As dawn crept over the horizon, the Sultana's smoldering hulk drifted toward Hen Island, lodging among a cluster of inundated trees. A handful of survivors scrambled back onto the bow, fending off encroaching flames. John Fogelman and his sons, watching from Fogelman's Landing, set out with a crude raft and a pole. They reached the vessel just in time, pulling the last desperate soul to safety moments before the Sultana sank beneath the river at around 7 o'clock in the morning. Its 5-hour ordeal finally over. In the end, 786 people were rescued and ferried to Memphis, where 5 hospitals and the soldiers' home, a Civil War-era haven for troops, awaited. Most bore severe burns, broken bones, and the toll of exhaustion and exposure from the frigid spring waters. 200 would succumb in the days that followed to burns. Others ended up dying from infections and their open wounds from the river, sickness, and hypothermia. Of the roughly 50 women and children aboard, only 4 or 5 women survived, 2 civilians and 2 or 3 crew members, while every child perished. The final count painted a grim picture. It is estimated the number of deaths were as high as over 1,800, though the exact number remains unknown due to the lack of recovery of victims lost to the river. Memphis became a city of mourning and makeshift graves. Rescuers pulled bodies from the Mississippi, placing them in pine coffins along the waterfront until supplies dwindled. Then, they laid the rest side by side on the levee, shrouded in blankets or scraps of cloth. The river, raging at flood stage, swallowed most victims, their remains spotted floating downstream for days, some as far as hundreds of miles away, lost to the current's unrelenting pull. The survivors, battered but alive, received care in Memphis hospitals and the soldiers' home before departing in waves, first in large groups, then in 2s and 3s, carrying scars both seen and unseen. Justice slipped through the cracks. Captain James Cass Mason, who'd gambled with lives for profit and ordered the botched boiler patch, lay among the dead. A lukewarm investigation pinned most blame on Mason, who perished, and thus couldn't shift responsibility elsewhere. Hatch, cloaked by political ties to his brother, and figures like Lincoln and Grant, melted into obscurity. Despite the staggering loss of an estimated over 1,800 lives, more Union deaths than most Civil War battles, no one was punished. The Sultana's tragedy, a lethal brew of greed and negligence, faded from the spotlight, its echoes drowned out by a nation eager to turn the page on war's miseries. The Sultana's catastrophic end on April 27, 1865, should have seized the nation's gaze. but it unfolded amid a torrent of epochal events that relegated it to the margins. April had already delivered General Lee's surrender, signaling the Civil War's twilight, only to be shattered by Abraham Lincoln's assassination on the 14th. His body then winding across the country in a mournful procession, whose lingering coverage eclipsed the Sultana's horror in the press. On April 26th, John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's killer, met his end, while Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston surrendered to General William T. Sherman in North Carolina that same day, part of the South's prolonged surrender. Meanwhile, Jefferson Davis, the fleeing Confederate president, was hunted by Union cavalry. The tragedy struggled to pierce the press's focus. Big newspapers, fixated on the war's climactic drama and the hunt for Booth, gave the tragedy scant ink, and a war-weary nation, ready to move past its horrors, let it slip into the shadows. Despite its significance, the Sultana remains a lesser-known chapter in American history. The Sultana itself vanished beneath the river's surface, its charred remains swallowed by sand and silt, entombing it deep in the riverbed's mud. As the river shifted eastward over decades, the wreck was left stranded under what became an Arkansas soybean field, 2 miles from the modern channel. There it lay forgotten until 1982, when Jerry O. Potter, a Memphis attorney and devoted Sultana historian, located its buried remains. To this day, she remains dormant under the Arkansas soil, a covered memorial to the men, women, and children aboard the Sultana. Potter's discovery pulled the steamboat's story from obscurity to cementing its grave as a somber monument to the lives lost. In 1916, Tennessee survivors raised a striking monument at Mount Olive Cemetery. More markers followed. In Cincinnati's waterfront, where the boat was born, Vicksburg, where it was doomed by greed, Memphis's wharf, its last stop, and scattered across states like Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Arkansas, honoring the fallen. In 2015, on the disaster's 150th anniversary, an interim Sultana Disaster Museum opened in Marion, Arkansas, near the buried wreck, displaying relics like furnace bricks and a 14-foot model. Its walls inscribed with the names of all aboard, an estimated over 2,500. A permanent, state-of-the-art museum, slated for a renovated auditorium in 2025, promises to deepen that legacy, a long-overdue tribute to a tragedy that, though overshadowed in its time, endures as America's deadliest maritime chapter. Still, this maritime catastrophe lingers in the periphery of American memory, overshadowed by the era's louder dramas and rarely whispered in the same breath as the Titanic. It is a tale woven from greed, Captain Mason's pursuit of profit, Captain Hatch's corrupt bargain, and neglect, from a patched boiler to a vessel packed beyond reason. But was this an unfortunate accident, the bad result of the combination of greed and irresponsibility? Or something more sinister, like sabotage by Confederate sympathizers seeking revenge against the North? Some conspiracy theories suggest foul play, due to many confessions years later, of Southern agents planting a coal torpedo among the fuel, a desperate act to strike at returning Union soldiers. In 1903, a story emerged alleging that a Tennessee farmer along the Mississippi River sabotaged the Sultana to retaliate against Union gunboats that stole his wood unpaid. A newspaper report claimed he hid gunpowder inside a hollowed-out log, leaving it in his woodpile for the Sultana to unwittingly take aboard. Yet, this theory falls apart since the coal-burning Sultana wouldn't have used wood fuel, rendering the tale unlikely. On July 2, 2014, an episode of PBS's History Detectives explored the disaster's evidence, dismissing sabotage claims like this and focusing instead on how the Sultana was allowed to depart Vicksburg so perilously overloaded. The probe zeroed in on Captain Reuben Benton Hatch, the corrupt and incompetent quartermaster behind the fiasco, propped up by ties to his brother, Ozias M. Hatch, an Illinois politician and confidant of President Lincoln. Throughout the Civil War, Hatch botched his quartermaster duties while siphoning off thousands of dollars from the government. Though courts-martial loomed, he clinched endorsements from Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, letters now held in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. After the Sultana disaster, Hatch dodged justice, skipping 3 subpoenas for Captain Speed's trial and dying in 1871, protected by powerful allies, including 2 presidents. The historic tragedy of the Sultana remains tombed in the Arkansas earth where it lies buried, much like its story. Yet, like the buried vessel itself, its story should be preserved and remembered as the most devastating maritime disaster in United States history.